Welcome back to day 2 of the Bay Area Battery Summit. I am so pleased to offer Elliot Mainzer, who is the CEO of the California Independent System Operator, as our day 2 keynote. I had the opportunity to speak with him about his first little over a month in the job. He comes to us from the Pacific Northwest, but he's a native son. He grew up in San Francisco, went to University of California at Berkeley, and left for Portland about 20 years ago and worked at BPA, which is the big federal power agency in the Pacific Northwest, for about 18 years, the last 7 of which he was the administrator of the Bonneville Power Administration. What's impressive about Elliot is he brings a fantastic combination of in-depth understanding of power systems, both transmission and generation, with a very deep understanding of stakeholder connections and processes. And I think, as you'll see in this discussion, he's got a deep understanding because California was one of his major customers in the Pacific Northwest, for what California needs now and what the opportunity is with the California Independent System Operator, our other agencies, utilities, CCAs, and stakeholders to really take the next step in the transformation of our electric power system to meet decarbonization goals, both in the power industry and the transportation industry. Enjoy. Elliot, welcome back to California. We are so happy and really lucky to have somebody with all of your background coming in to lead the California Independent System Operator. It's really amazing because you're coming to us from the Pacific Northwest, and California depends on the Pacific Northwest for a substantial portion of our energy imports. In fact, we really depend on the Pacific Northwest for the granddaddy of all energy storage, that is hydro from large dams. So you spent the last 2 decades in the Northwest. The last 7 years or so as the BPA administrator. Talk to us a little bit about what it looks like when you were sitting in the Northwest, looking back down to California, your home state, with California being your customer, and specifically a customer of your Pacific Northwest system.
Well, thanks, Julie. It's really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and it's a great question. You know, it's as I'm adjusting to being here down in California and still getting my geography set. It's a really interesting to reflect on what it was like all those years being up in the north. You know, the Federal Columbia River Power System is obviously an incredible asset. You know, I think when I look back over the last 10, 15, 20 years, the changes in the renewable energy portfolio of the Pacific Northwest would never have been possible without that hydroelectric system. The flexibility and the carbon-free characteristics and that transmission grid were amazing assets. And so that was always something that I really benefited from. But just looking more broadly at California and the Northwest, there's been a tremendous sort of interrelationship and codependency between those regions for years. You know, going back to the 70s and 80s, there were big exchange agreements between the big utilities in California and the Pacific Northwest because we had sort of offsetting patterns of load in the winter and in the summer. We sold a lot of capacity to California for many, many years. The interties were built, you know, back in the 1970s to stitch these two regions together. They've been an incredible asset. And as we've watched California just absolutely take off in terms of policy leadership in the West, that market has become increasingly important for the Pacific Northwest because the hydro resource, of course, has so many incredible characteristics. It also has this uncertainty, right? We're a really, you know, our power supply is a function of Mother Nature, and no 2 years are the same. So every year there's a lot of work that goes into figuring out how much surplus capability is going to be available, both energy and capacity. And California has always been a principal market for that. So as the state has moved and aggressively embraced decarbonization with AB 32, SB 100, all the policies that's on the books, that market has become increasingly interesting, particularly from the perspective of ramp and capacity and flexibility. And of course, storage. The hydroelectric system really is the original big battery. We benefited on that for years up at Grand Coulee and the other parts of the system. Of course, the Canadian resource and the Mid-Sea are also important hydro resources. And as California has continued to evolve, not only has the energy imbalance market become a whole new opportunity for folks in adjacent states, but also just the general need for flexibility and ramp and solutions to the net peak. And I think that the hydro system is always very well positioned to provide that. And of course, as battery technology and other forms of storage come on, they become partners and other participants in a market that ultimately should serve many of us very well.
It's really interesting that you point out about the hydro variability year to year. Of course, that's true. And one of the things that's interesting to me is just like we built an electric system over the last century that deals with load variability, we also assume generation variability. We also often think about base load power. You turn on the plant, you turn off the plant. That's not how renewables work, but nor is it the way that hydro works. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is we've been dealing with variable hydro forever, literally since the beginning of hydro. And so when I think about what you're dealing with now, as you bring on batteries to a system, in some ways it's almost like an inverse. It's not seasonably variable. It's variable depending on when it was charged or discharged. When you think about hydro variability, did you have a year or two in your history at BPA where the hydro situation was actually a pretty big challenge for you?
It's a really fabulous question. Actually, I'll start out with a historical point, and then I'll come back to the kind of the shorter term question you're asking. When you look back at the history of the development of the hydroelectric system in the Pacific Northwest, there was a profound realization that variability, just week on week, season on season, year on year, really called for storage. It's the storage capabilities of the system were built and installed in order to address that variability. And we learned a lot in the Pacific Northwest about managing variability. Every single year is different. It is amazing. I had 20 hydro years up at Bonneville, and not a single one of them was the same. So dealing with load uncertainty, dealing with Mother Nature uncertainty, dealing with temperature and precipitation, we were very comfortable with that for many, many years. And a lot of the tools and techniques that we developed for forecasting, state awareness tools, grew out of weather and precipitation forecasting that we were very familiar with. So no 2 years are the same, and there were definitely a few nail biters. I can tell you there were those times when you'd go into December and you'd be at this point of maximum uncertainty. You just don't know what the water year is going to look like. And you had to figure out how to hedge that, how to manage that. And all of a sudden you'd get into January and boom, it would just rain for 3 months. And everything you did in December wasn't looking that smart anymore. But it was just that variability. But the storage capabilities of the system, both shorter term and longer term, were always an incredible asset.
Right. So here's a good thing. One of the things that BPA did really well was to think long term. You don't build a dam overnight. Similarly, in California, now that you're back, it's wonderful. We actually have plenty of visibility about where we want to go. We have visibility back from SB 32 on our overall decarbonization plan. We have visibility on our goals for renewable energy with SB 100. And we now have, thanks to Governor Newsom, visibility on our transportation electrification goals by 2035. So with all that visibility, we know we are planning for variability going forward with solar and wind, but we also know that we can plan for energy storage, including batteries, which now I was just noting from some CAISO documents, we have just slightly more energy storage in the CAISO queue than we do renewables, which is an incredible statement. It wasn't true even 2 years ago. So with all that, it's an incredible moment to be able to say we've proven we can deploy solar and wind at scale, and we've got the goals and in fact laws in California to drive decarbonization. Your job is to reliably deliver power. Historically, that job has been from generators to customers. What we've just seen from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is they also want us to be able to move power from one customer to another. So when you think about how to integrate the goals that you've just been asked to deploy, reliably deliver power through the California Independent System Operator, you come back into California with, in many ways, the best of all possible opportunities. Talk a little bit about that, because obviously you made the choice to join us at this moment.
Well, I mean, for starters, I've been in the Northwest now. I grew up in San Francisco, as you mentioned, California, and I ended up living in Oregon for 21 years. I never really expected. When I left California in 1995, I expected it was a round trip ticket. I didn't expect it would take quite that long. And just the last couple of years, watching what's been happening in the state, the level of leadership, the level of commitment, the focus and determination, that really so inspiring to me that really I was ready to pack the tent and come on back down here, including moving my family and my kiddos. So it's a big move, but it's so alluring to be here at such an exciting time. And it really, even though we've got, lots of different things to still make progress on, I think the opportunity in front of the state is just profound. And so as I come in and I look at the situation, it's been about 6 weeks since I arrived on the job. I think certainly the traditional technologies that what I call traditional now, bulk scale renewables, the wind and the solar, and now the hybrid resources are obviously playing a phenomenal shape. But the evolution and now the deployment of battery technology, both at the grid scale and behind the meter, is just an unbelievable opportunity. And I'm actually very fascinated by Order 2222. I think that the opportunity and quite frankly, the need to harness and leverage all of the capabilities of all the resources that are installed, both in the distribution side and the bulk grid, is absolutely essential. And it's essential for lots of different reasons. But we're going to need, from a resource adequacy perspective, every megawatt of capability and capacity and flexibility that we can bring into this grid, not to mention the need to optimize our distribution systems and to give consumers choices. I mean, consumers really are wanting more self-determination in their energy choices. And if there are resources that are there that have surplus capabilities that can be brought into the wholesale dispatch, I think that's absolutely fascinating. So I'm still just the first few weeks gathering so much information, trying to really understand what that interface between the distribution system and the wholesale grid needs to look like. What is that plumbing? What is that interface? What's the regulatory overlap? And I know, and I've heard it already just in the short time that I've been here, that there's effectively capability that's on the grid right now that is not necessarily being harnessed as completely as it could be. And so I'm really looking forward to understanding the CAISO's role in that, and then also working with my colleagues at the CPUC, the Energy Commission, industry, and figuring out how do we really unleash that capability. So a lot of it, and then also we'll come back to this, I think, the issues around planning and procurement are also really, really important, resource adequacy. But I'll take a breath there and see if there's anything you'd add to that picture.
Well, one thing that's super interesting to me is that as horrific as these wildfires have been, and they're truly horrific this year, the insight that they offer us is that we must plan for disruption. And it's one of the interfaces that you have an opportunity to establish as you establish your connections back with the PUC and the utilities, is how to handle those moments of disruption. Because in some cases, we have transmission lines that just are interrupted by fire underneath them. It's not even a generation problem. And on other cases, we literally have situations where we just have to turn things off from a safety perspective. So it feels like there's this opportunity, and the Assembly committee meeting in September, just before you started, was an excellent example of it, to really tighten up those relationships between the agencies and the other entities in the state, the distribution companies that run the wires after the transmission level. I'm interested in your thoughts about the complexities there, and particularly, you come from a very complex system in the Pacific Northwest that was across states, across interest groups. I'd love to have your thoughts on that effort to link together those groups to address this next generation of resilience and reliability issues.
Yeah, it's a fabulous question. It's interesting, when I was preparing, just going through the process of reflecting on my career in terms of coming back down to California, one of the aspects of my experience in the Pacific Northwest that was almost perfectly analogous to the situation here in California was working with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation on the Columbia River Power System. And you had these very interesting sort of multi-jurisdictional overlapping areas of responsibility. And I think a lot of people they don't remember that actually the Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation actually own the dams. Bonneville doesn't own the dams, they own the transmission grid.
Right.
And so it required tremendous amounts of coordination and collaboration across jurisdictions, across agencies, across organizations with state folks. And when I look at California and I see the role of the ISO in terms of real-time reliability, transmission planning, dispatch, technology, enabling, integrating resources, I look at the profoundly important role of the PUC in terms of the planning, the procurement rates, the Energy Commission with the forecasting and all the incredible programs that David and his team are administering. There is a very, very analogous situation where you really need seamless coordination and collaboration and integration across that entire drivetrain between the the PUC and the CEC and the CAISO, and really, really strong collaboration and input from the utilities, from the environmental community, from the technology service providers, from consumers. And so I have worked in a lot of really, I would say, difficult and controversial political contexts, with many folks from different, state and federal folks in the political realm. I've worked with the tribes, I've worked with environmental organizations, I've worked with technology service providers, I've worked with public power utilities, investor-owned utilities, and there's a lot of common interest in there. A lot of it goes back to the consumer, it goes back to local self-determination, it goes back to the desire for efficiency and reliability, environmental sustainability. And I think there's a lot of that core alignment here in California. It's just people are being asked to do a lot of stuff. It's a big lift. We've taken on a big challenge here. And I think there's a little bit of an sense of folks being overwhelmed. There's a lot of dockets. There's a lot going on, profound amount of change. I know just even in the control room here at CAISO, my first couple trips down to the control room to meet the folks operating the system, they're like, boy, Mr. Mainzer, we got a lot going on here. I sure wish I could have a timeout. And I'm like, not so sure that timeout's coming anytime soon. So getting people working collaboratively, getting them talking and listening to each other, looking for ways to align up analytics and the user experience across that entire drivetrain, and to make sure that California really has a true world-class planning, procurement, operation, resource adequacy framework. I can tell that's going to be job number one. And I'm excited. I mean, everybody I've met so far, including I've had a chance to meet the leadership at the PUC and the CEC, wonderful people, really looking forward to working with them. And then of course, to all my old friends here in the IOU community, Julie, I've known you for many years, also in the technology area. I just really excited to work with everybody and figure some things out. So that's really how I approach it.
Yeah, I was thrilled when I realized that you were the chosen successor. Steve did a great job, and I just want to give a shout out to the CAISO team. Truly world-class, just fabulous group of people running our grid. They're put to substantial stress. To your example that you used down there talking to your control room operators, they've got a hard job. What I will say is that your announcement came about a week before the blackouts in August. And I looked at the notification of stage 2 emergency and thought, oh my gosh, Elliot's coming on and he's going to have a really serious focus about reliability, not in the long run, in the very short run. So just as kind of a point, given the fact that we did just go through a reliability perturbation, mind you, it was a handful of hours over a couple of days, but it happened. We do have a need to avoid those situations as much as humanly possible. Talk a little bit about next summer. Next summer, it's hard to say, let's just go out for new procurement and come up with things that don't exist by next summer. You got to work with what you got in the pipeline. I'm sure you've spent a little time talking about this with your team. Give us an outlook for next summer.
Yeah, it's, I'll never forget the August 14th. I was actually out on the Oregon coast when my cell phone started tap dancing across my desk with the ISO app in the stage 3. And I certainly knew we were moving into a new inflection point. But I tend to see it as a moment that we can really seize. There are some really important learnings. I think everybody recognizes that there are challenges still, and there's just a profound commitment now to really, again, harness the intellectual capital of our industry and figure this out. I think for next summer, obviously, we can't let that happen again. And even during the events of August 14th and 15th, I've gone back and I know that, the battery storage community already in its early stages here in California played a useful role. The LS Power battery down in San Diego was scheduled to come online. I think they were able to accelerate their online and already contributed. That was really helpful. I think we all know that, we don't have a huge window for additional procurement between now and next summer. There's likely to be some, but the reality is I think we're going to bring another couple thousand megawatts of batteries onto the grid. That will be the principal incremental capacity resource that's coming onto the system for next summer. So we're going to have a bit of a coming out party next summer for our storage resource to see how well it can perform in a reliability context. And I know that the storage industry is very motivated to show up and be that dependable provider of resource. Now, there's a lot to talk about. And already, as I've spoken with folks in the battery storage space, there are commercial structuring issues, there are financing issues, there are price signal issues, there are charge and charge parameter issues. The market operator here at the ISO, we have the obligation to make sure we're sending the right price signals for the capabilities that we need at the most critical junctures of system operations. I respect the profound desire for self-determination on this part of the battery storage providers to be able to choose when they bid and offer capability into the market. And I know they've already sort of running into different types of pricing and dispatch issues. So I think we have a lot to talk about. And I think it's good that we're starting to address them very early on, because I think we want to get a really, really clean and transparent understanding of the commercial and operational model for batteries as they come onto the grid so that they can provide a variety of services. Now, for us at the ISO, obviously for next summer, resource adequacy capacity and capability from 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the evening in August and September is going to be game number one. We've got to be able to get through that period. And so that's an important part of it. And making sure that we have a good understanding of what the grid expectations are and what the commercial expectations are of the battery providers will be really important. And then as we scale up, it's likely that there will be different types of commercial and operational regimes for storage. Some folks may want to come on and just prospect for bid offer, arbitrage. They may want to just sell into the reg up, reg down markets. For folks that come on for RA capacity, we're going to really need them there to be there for the net short, the net peak of the system. So there's a lot to talk about, but I'm pretty excited about that to get that right. And then, of course, there was also quite a bit that went on, a bit of I think they call it sort of dialing for megawatts. That August 15th and early September event, there was a lot of telephone calls going on in terms of demand response. We need to bring some of that back into more sort of systematic production and make sure we're doing the right thing for the environment as well. So there's a lot of work to do between now and next summer. And of course, the ISO, we found out, as the system conditions were quite strange. You get closer and closer to the physical margin of the system. And the ISO discovered that there were certain elements of its market design with respect to scheduling and the convergence bidding market and the residual unit commitment market that had some unintended consequences. And we learned about those things. And I think we're owning them, being very transparent and honest. You're going to continuously learn and try to improve your market so it does the things you need it to do. So we have some work to do here over the course of the next couple of months to make sure that the financial mechanisms of the market don't distort what the physical capabilities are, and we can have the cleanest vision possible into where the system balance lies. So lots of work to do, and we will be keeping our eye on the ball between now and next August. I can promise you that.
Yeah, it is interesting to me because you're coming from a neighboring and in fact critical supplier and sometimes customer of California from the Pacific Northwest. Your awareness of the fact that you've got a truly interconnected WAC in the Western US on a grid level is super high. I also wonder about your thoughts. Batteries are really different. One of the things I love doing is talking about batteries as similar to solar and batteries as dissimilar to solar. And one of the things that's ironic on the dissimilar side is the fact that we are deploying batteries at a just amazing inflection point, disruptive pace across the world right now. In solar, we started in Germany, we went to Spain, we came to the US. The US had residential going, but we didn't have utility scale going until 2008. Then we went out to other parts of the US kind of one step at a time. And then China took off. It was very sequential. That is not true for batteries. Batteries are happening all over the world, all at the same time. The upside of that is you have the opportunity to really link to other parts of the world and learn from their real-time deployment expertise, whether it's the technical capability of a battery or the market design issues. I'm interested in your thoughts as somebody who, as BPA administrator, needed to stay in deep touch with what was going on in California as your key customer, on how to set up some level of coordination or communication paths between the market operators around the world.
Yeah, I honestly, one of the I guess I characterize it as second order, but maybe sort of close second opportunity here to come into the ISO is that Steve Burbrick was very involved with an organization called the GO15, the Grid Operators 15. This is a group of the largest grids around the world, grid operators who get together on a regular basis from China, Russia, the UK, Ireland, Australia, and they share their technical experience as they work to better integrate rather than just accommodate all this new technology. And I've already had some of the initial, I get to be an officer of this effort. There's another effort that came out of it's called the GPST. It's another effort to bring research across the world to address some of these technical issues, coordination amongst big international utility consortium. I could not be more excited to be part of that and to learn and share expertise. And California certainly is well ahead on some of these topics, but there's some other areas. Audrey Zillman been down in Australia the last couple of years, now going to Google. What a fascinating opportunity to compare notes with her on her experience down there. The folks at National Grid in the UK are doing some fabulous stuff. And so, yeah, we really can learn and share expertise. And not only can we bring those things back to California, but I think the world can simultaneously accelerate and learn together. So I'm super excited about that part of the job as well. I have to kind of keep it under control because job number one is right here and we've got our work cut out for us. But I'll certainly look for some opportunities to learn and bring that information home.
That's fantastic news.
Yeah.
When I think about the kinds of things that's worth sharing, both directions, learning from and offering learning to, one of them is safety. One of the things that is true about every generation resource is that they have the potential for major safety issues. That is definitely true of dams. We early on in California's history, we had dams fail and we lost hundreds of lives in those examples, particularly down in Southern California where I live now. But we also have, even with a gas plant or a wind turbine, you have the potential to throw a blade. The difference about batteries is that because we are looking in some cases to put batteries right in load centers, the safety issues are taken up a notch. People in California are very sensitive to the San Bruno disaster in PG&E's territory with their gas pipeline. And we're going to be at a point where we're adding batteries very quickly. We know over the last several years, we've had issues with battery safety from phones being recalled to Korea shutting down their battery fleet for several months to recalling some electric vehicles. We do know that battery safety is one of the top issues that battery manufacturers are working on all over the world right now. And we have some great examples. Tesla's doing a fantastic job with battery safety. And I really want to give them a shout out for that. But as somebody who's depending on making sure that the batteries that are there for resource adequacy are delivering, talk a little bit about what you would advise market participants to think about, some of whom are new to wholesale generation markets, as they think about applying something that's not exactly a brand new technology, but certainly at the scale and the way that we're deploying them, it is new to the grid. And I'm interested in your thoughts for market participants.
Yeah. Well, Julie, you're hitting a real nerve with me because certainly when you grow up in the utility industry and you're managing a lot of high voltage infrastructure and you have your people out there hanging off of 500 kV lines, et cetera, safety is absolutely job number one. As a matter of fact, it was probably more than anything the central organizing principle of my entire administratorship at BPA. And when you focus on safety, when you really look not only culturally in terms of making sure your people are comfortable calling attention to concerns and raising their hand and having them addressed, but when you really look at all your business practices, all your manufacturing capabilities, when you design safety into your product, it just pays incredible dividends. And I think the safety industry, as you mentioned, the battery industry has had some experience, and I think it's been good. They're certainly, obviously, I think casting the light, trying to figure out what are the lessons learned, how can we adapt. I think there is a profound recognition that when you're putting your technology not only on the grid, but close to people, close to their homes, in their basements, that's a technology that has to be safe. And I think that, the recognition is there, but certainly manufacturer designing safety and understanding where you're going to be operating and the kinds of risks that you may be susceptible, whether it's flooding or earthquakes or fires, and designing that kind of resiliency and redundancy in is very, very important. And then just really working together and adopting those best practices and those best learnings and bringing that in, because a technology can go backwards so quickly if it's not demonstrated to be safe. And I think, as you mentioned, look, every technology, I remember I wrote a geography paper on the St. Francis Dam when I was at Cal. I think that was the big one that was Mulholland's downfall, right? It was a real mess. And we've seen it happens across big technologies of different scales. But for batteries coming in now, it's great to hear, and I know you're a huge proponent of that's a topic that's really on folks' mind, because if you get that wrong, you got big problems. So good question.
No doubt, no doubt. So one of the things I'm interested in when you talk about technologies on our grid, we are at this moment where we know, I think it's 95% plus of all the energy storage on the CAISO queue right now is batteries. And there's some different flavors of batteries, but it's batteries. By 2030, we're going to be in a very different place at the end of this decade in terms of what our electric system looks like. A lot of the gas plants will be turned off even by 2025. Diablo, our nuclear plant, will be off the grid. I expect that we will see next generation incremental improvements in a whole bunch of technologies, but there may be a few that are today a little bit more like a glimmer in the eye that may actually make it to commercialization by the end of the decade. I'm interested in your thoughts on that as somebody who's now had about 6 weeks to talk to the team and what they'd at least love to see. And if you could send a market signal just in the next 90 seconds, please commercialize X, what would it be?
Right. Well, Julie, when I think about this question, I sort of reflect to you and I our youthful selves back in 1999 and 2000 when the green energy markets were first really kicking in, and you sort of cut today 20 years later and you just say, try to imagine what's going on today. That was almost an impossibility, right? So I have a bit of a sort of a humility in terms of not knowing what it's going to look like. But there's two things. I think, first of all, we learned this heavily even given some of the most advanced characteristics of the hydroelectric system, its flexibility, it still ran into constraints under certain periods of time. I mean, big irony, you get into big water here and a big wind here, those resources didn't work that well with each other, right? You ran out of storage and flexibility capability. So diversity of storage resources, both in terms of technology, duration, location, I think will be important. And I know that there already is a drive to look at different types of technological, chemical sources. I think clearly some of the longer duration storage will be interesting. I'm very fascinated to see the CCA procurement that's going on the 8-hour stuff. That's very fascinating. Certainly some level of big bulk storage across different types of technology will be very helpful. And I can't predict exactly what it will be, but I think as we do more, as our resource planning gets more and more advanced, and we see the benefits of resource diversification, I think you will see storage diversify across a number of different criteria. And I couldn't tell you exactly how it's going to play out, but I think it's going to be necessary. We're going to find that, especially as we really try to displace the the megawatt hours of the gas fleet. I think the gas industry recognizes the production of molecules from gas plants is going to decrease over time. It's going to be much more of a capacity and flexibility resource. But what's going to provide that? It's going to be a real challenge. The other thing is, I think from a grid operator perspective, because we don't know what the technology is, and because we're theoretically somewhat agnostic to which of the preferred resources, I will say, in the state ultimately, dominate on the grid. We just want to make sure, I want to make sure that our grid architecture has the fundamental capabilities and flexibilities to accommodate different types of technology. So obviously in the control center, you want to really make sure that those state awareness tools and the technology and the ramping and the forecasting and the computer learning and the artificial intelligence learning are really, really advanced, because it's going to be information and data and generation patterns and load patterns are going to be coming at you from many, many unpredictable directions going forward. And then I mentioned earlier, because we really do want to harness the capabilities of all the resources that are on the grid, both the distribution level resources and the bulk grid resources, we really need to think through what that grid architecture from the dispatch node in the wholesale system all the way down to that storage resource in somebody's basement looks like. And there's a whole bunch of policy and program and technology and information technology infrastructure that's being built slowly but surely, but we really need to envision that and then have a roadmap to that grid architecture over the next 10, 15, 20 years, so we know what we're building out to, so that a wide variety of resources can participate. But if we don't build some of that fundamental underpinning and don't have a flexible grid that can accommodate that diversity, I think we're going to run into real problems. So I'm still getting my thinking together on what that looks like, but I'm excited to work with industry, the distribution system operators, bulk grid operators, the storage industry, and try to figure that out. It'd be an interesting challenge.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm confident of is that I thought Steve did a great job of getting out and talking to people, but his world, as with all leaders of RTOs and ISOs, was really wholesale market participants. I mean, that was kind of his defined scope. Because we're now reaching into consumers' basements, garages, roofs, etc., and really looking at using distributed behind the meter resources as part of the wholesale market, all of a sudden the stakeholder group that we're talking about as being part of the conversation around wholesale markets, it didn't double or triple. It may have just gone up by an order of magnitude. And so it's an amazing moment to take that on, because you actually do come from a background that included thinking about retail electricity markets, which is how we met in the very far away past, it feels like now. Yeah. But when I think about it, we're in such, the benefit of our current position is we do still have planning time. So we have planning time to think about the long duration question. We also have planning time to think about how we're going to provide domestic resources for the far end of the supply chain for batteries. Where do we get our lithium from? Well, at New Energy Nexus, we're working with folks to try to make sure that we have Lithium Valley in Southern California at the Salton Sea be a resource for that. We can think about it as a complete system, from how we get the raw materials to build the equipment that goes into the system. When you think about your kind of your next couple of big steps that you're going to take now that you can think about your next 60 days after your first, talk a little bit about what you see on your immediate plate, and in particular, who you'd encourage to start to think about participating in CAISO proceedings that probably have never done so before.
Well, thank you for asking that. And I would say, one of the things I'm still trying to figure out is the sort of, I can't think of roles, responsibilities, functional territory of the distribution system operator and the wholesale operator, and that kind of push and pull and opportunity that's created between the great tighter integration. And I have profound respect and knowledge of, the jurisdictional territory for the state and for the distribution system operators and their resources and their consumers. And I don't feel as though it's as much as us reaching into their space as saying, hey, we have a whole space here that if we work together can create additional sense of opportunity and optimization for you. But because your customers and your technology service partners are going to be looking to our space as potential opportunities, I'd like to create opportunities for them to better understand our space and participate in our stakeholder processes and understand what it means to access that. And then to make sure that the price signals are rational and they don't create competing, or mixed messages in terms of system optimization, and that we create a really nice plug and play opportunity in this space. So that's something that's very important. So I appreciate you opening up this opportunity today to speak with the participants at the summit, because we do see you all as potential wonderful partners, and I would like you to have opportunities to participate in our stakeholder processes, help us with our market design, et cetera. And I think, though, at the same time, for me, I've tried to think. I remember when Julie sent me a couple of texts shortly after the 14th and 15th saying exactly what you said before. Boy, you're going to have your hands full down here. And you were exactly right. And I kept thinking of that Chinese character that conveys that sense of crisis and opportunity. And when I think about the next 60 days, and I think about planning and procurement and resource adequacy in California, I wish there must be, I'm trying to figure out what is that character that captures both that sort of sense of extreme urgency and some level of fear and concern combined with collaboration, right? And you asked me before about the jurisdictions. I really look to the PUC and the Energy Commission and the Investor and Utilities and many others in the state as my big time collaborators in terms of getting planning and procurement and RA and system operations right. We learned a few things coming out of August and 14th, 15th. We have to learn from those lessons. California has taken on a profoundly important and ambitious challenge. Getting this state and the 30 million people that are inside of our system and the other millions who are outside of, with the public power utilities and others, getting this state decarbonized, migrating the transportation sector onto the grid, integrating all these resources it's a big, profoundly important lift. And we are going to have to be really, really good at the planning and the analysis and the procurement so we can create those opportunities for the right resources to get onto the system. And so I do think we had a little bit of a bell ringing. We felt, we learned some big time things at the ISO. We got to get them fixed. And I think all of us that have roles and responsibilities in the chain around what we typically refer to more generically as resource adequacy, not just the RA proceeding at the PUCs, but the idea of making sure that the grid is reliable, that we accomplish this transition to a clean energy future in a reliable and efficient manner so we can look our consumers in the eyes and say we did the very, very best job. We did a really smart job of integrating all this new technology and proving that clean is also very reliable. That's the challenge. And I think, I know that the folks that I'm reporting up to, the governor's office in California and my board and my customers, they expect nothing less of us. So I am very focused on trying to figure out what that looks like, and really appreciate just even today the opportunity to start sharing that with you and the folks participating in the summit, and just look forward to meeting people, rolling up our sleeves. And you said something earlier that I couldn't agree with more. I'm really happy. I've received such a warm welcome here at the ISO. The people here are also just genuinely excited about working on these challenges. There's some tough issues, and we're struggling with a few things to figure that out. But to a person here, everybody's just motivated to figure this out, which is just fabulous. So I'm very happy. It's great to be back in Northern California, and just appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you today.
Well, that's a fantastic close. Let me just say that the CAISO has been absolutely instrumental now for over 20 years for putting the opportunity to transform the power sector to its next position to actually be something that's contributing to the environment rather than detracting from it. And it's succeeded. But we're at a new moment for deployment to really completing that process. And it seems quite appropriate, actually, that with your history from seeing it from the beginning and having all the experience at one of our core partners, that you'd be taking the helm. So I just want to thank you again. Couldn't think of a better person to be in the role that you're in now. Very much appreciate the fact that you're taking the time to reach out to the broad energy storage community and the battery community in particular at the Bay Area Battery Summit. And any closing thoughts?
No, it's wonderful. Thanks again, Julie. And to all of you, really hope you all continue to stay safe and healthy. And thank you to all of you for what you're doing. I really appreciate the level of passion and intelligence and commitment that the battery storage sector is bringing to this industry. And I think you're poised for phenomenal success. And I'm looking forward to being a partner with you on that path. So thanks again, and everybody, all the best to you. And thank you, Julie. Always appreciate the friendship and the partnership.
Thank you, Elliot.